Hello, you're very welcome to this launch of Kerri Dochartaigh's book, Thin Places, which is this wonderful piece of art that has just been published. Kerri was born in Derry in 1983, and her work has appeared in various places, Winter Papers, the Irish Times, Caught by the River, and lots of people have been queuing up to talk about this book, including Christine Dwyer-Hickey, who says, "It seemed as if everything about life is contained within the covers of this astonishing book. Politics, history, nature, language, and of course, love. A profound and moving work of art," which is something was my experience of reading the book as well. Kerri, welcome. Congratulations on publishing this wonderful book. And I wanted to start by talking to you about the fact that first time I ever came across your work was a wonderful essay called Mudlarking, and I reread it again ahead of our chat, and it feels to me very much like a prologue to this book, and I'm wondering, where did you start as a writer and move from that essay, and I think in about 2017, to the completion of this book?
Okay, so hi Sinead. Hi everybody. So after Mudlarking, the book took a number. Before Mudlarking, I had written a children's book called For North. And that was kind of the beginning of the book. And then it shape-shifted a number of times, as books do. Mudlarking was a one-off essay. I then had a collection of essays, which was kind of little fragments, again, moving towards the idea of a big book. And then I spent the last few years writing Thin Places as what you've read. So it's kind of turned around. It's been in a few different shapes to get to where it is, which I think all art goes through, really. So yeah, I've been writing it for a long time.
Did you? I got the sense as well, just from knowing you online as well, that you were probably trying to work on it in this, come to the ends of it, maybe with edits in this very difficult year. Did this kind of pandemic gloom, isolation feeling sort of feed into the final sections of the book in terms of the final editing and closing it over and sending it back to Canongate?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was very interesting because obviously I edited it at the beginning of the pandemic. So my edits were sort of January, February, first set of proper full edits. And then March and April, I was kind of knee deep in it, which was quite intriguing. It was quite difficult, I think, because it was a difficult book to write and it was a much more difficult book to edit, particularly at the bottom of a lane with no internet and very dodgy signal. But I don't know if it fed into them as such because the book had been written so long before, but it's definitely fed into my experience of the edits of the book, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear you say that you found the editing harder than the writing, because I think some writers actually relish the edits. The first draft and the getting it down and is the hardest part, and then going back to fix it is almost a bit, you'll never have to do the work of a first draft again. Why do you say that you found the editing harder than the writing?
I did find it the best part of the book, the best part of the process, if that makes sense, but definitely the most difficult. I think because it's a book that does chart a journey. And I think with journey, we're kind of used to it being linear. We're not used to kind of jumping into parts of the journey in the middle of nowhere, kind of, if that makes sense. So I think when I was writing it followed a kind of a meandering flow, but a flow nonetheless. With the editing, it was like, okay, I'm jumping into this bit about a petrol bomb now, and then I'm talking about light, and then I'm, so it was a bit fragmentary, which I normally love, but I'm not sure. I did find the editing quite dark. Yeah. But ultimately, it's the most important part of writing. Maybe my next book, if I come to edits, I might feel a bit different.
I I think I know what you mean, though, because when you're drafting something, there is a sense you have to tell yourself in the first draft that no one's ever going to see it, or you might not write it. But with editing, you know, this is the final version. This is the thing that will go out into the world that people will see, that people will read. So there's that, I guess.
Well, at the very beginning of writing the book, Amy Liptrot, who has been a really important person in the book's journey as well as mine, told me that the first edit is for you. That's just yours. And like you said, you don't think anyone's going to read it. Then the second edit is for your, I think she said for your editor, I'd have to check. But then the third edit is for everyone else who's going to read the book, you know? So then it kind of, yeah, it shifts. It's, I did a series of edits on Thin Places, you know, and it doesn't look in any way like it did at the beginning, which is good.
That's what we're all hoping for in the process. Obviously, this book will be called a memoir. And I always think that memoir automatically, some people assume is autobiography, but there's an awful lot of things going on in this book. It's not just a memoir. You're talking about nature and history, Northern Ireland, and multiple other things. Some writers, and I possibly include myself in this, are resistant to the term memoir, but how do you feel about it?
Well, really interestingly, just last night when I was preparing for this, another writer that I really love, Darren Anderson, had a very funny thing on his Instagram. I don't know if anyone saw it, but it was a joke. It was like a memoirist walks into a bar kind of joke. And it kind of made me think about the fact that we, as writers, we have really a funny relationship with genre in general, and bearing your soul like that, you do it, but then there's also this really uneasy thing where you think, oh, I kind of cringe. I am cringing currently, like thinking about it is making me cringe, but at the same time, that unearthing is what I'm always drawn to. I'm always drawn to people who unearth something, either from within them or within the society they're in, or both, or kind of mix them all up. And I think that when we use terminology, it makes it a bit rather than just, you know, what it says on the back of the book. So I remember you saying as well that you could never have just written about you. You had to place your experience in a line of everyone else who'd influenced you and of everyone else that you felt it was relevant for as well. And that's something that I have kept at the back of my head. I've tried to keep the personal story there, but I've also tried to embed it somehow. But it is difficult. Yeah. Memoir's difficult.
Yeah, and I think you do it so well, and I think this book is what I like about the kind of nonfiction that I like, and that you'd find it in more than one part of the bookshop, I guess. There are lots of subjects, as I mentioned, in this book, and one that's extremely colossal, I think, is the North and Northern Ireland. You grew up in Derry in the early 80s, and you know that was pretty much the thick of things. I remember that time living in the South. How do you frame a subject that, you know, obviously intersects with your life on a kind of social and global issue? We're all watching the news, but then on a personal level, you have connections. You know, your parents, Protestant, Catholic. How did you decide, I'm going to write about the North, but where do you start? It's such a big, colossal thing. So how did you decide to approach it?
I did find that really difficult, knowing what my right was, in a way, kind of knowing we're really trying to ensure that the right people tell the right stories these days, which is really important and fair and should have been happening for ages. But it's, like I talk about in the book, it's very difficult if you've grown up with a culture of feeling like trauma wasn't big enough or wasn't important enough in this grand scheme of things. It's very hard to know what to vocalize and how. But ultimately, you know, the North, I'm not just someone who was born in the north, but I very much am someone who was born in the north. So I think to tell any personal story, I feel like place is very important for us all, but maybe even more so for people born in this island. And it's continuing to be that way. I mean, if we think about some of the issues that we're seeing occur again and again and again, women and children, people in vulnerable positions, it's got an awful lot to do with place. It's where they've come from. It's where they've been placed by, a society or a government. So I think writing about the North for me was difficult, but I couldn't escape it because my personal experiences are shaped by that. And so many other people's are as well. So it felt like the North is a story that belongs to any of us on the island on both sides of the border. So I think I tried to approach it as openly and I think as lovingly as I could, which I've tried to do because I really love it. I love where I come from, and yes, it was difficult, but I think there's a certain element that comes into play when you try to heal parts of your past that does change how you can write about them, I think.
Is there a sense, again, it's something that I get asked, I think a lot of nonfiction writers or people who write essays or memoir get asked about the C word, catharsis. Did you figure any things out? Did you feel any better for having written this book about certain subjects and certain parts of your life or experience?
That's, again, a kind of a funny one, isn't it? Because I think there are parts that do feel much easier now that I've written it, but I think there are parts that had to become much harder. So memories that kind of you had to look at that otherwise you might not have faced. And I think ultimately that's a good thing, but it might take a little while for the benefits of that maybe to come along. They might continue to come along. But I do think this book was a book I needed to write in that respect. Maybe not even for the catharsis, but just in writing it, I felt like I finally let it go and then move on and write all the other things I hope that I'll be able to write. I'd been dragging it around, this book, quite literally for years. So I think it's good to let it go and really let it go and move properly into the other, into the rest of the things that need written.
Absolutely. I personally don't believe in catharsis, but one thing I do say about essays or the work that I've written is that it helped me answer a question. Often I start with a piece of writing with the question. I want to know the answer to something. Sometimes it's something very big, sometimes it's something more minute. And that's the kind of, I don't even call it closure. It's just sometimes I've figured something out or figure it out how I feel about it by writing about it.
That's really, I think that's really refreshing and applaudable. I think with this book, I don't feel I had a question as such. It felt more like there was a creature inside me that was clawing at me that needed to get out, and I think it's out now. I think anything I write after this is going to be a very different shape because that creature's gone. And I did love that creature, if that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, it's gone.
It's so interesting to hear you, and so apt to hear you referred to it as a creature, because when I think about so much of this book, it is about a sense of place, whether that's the map or the island of Ireland or the border or the sea or the countryside. And you've always been somebody to me who writes really eloquently and beautifully about nature, about wildness, about birds and landscape. And I'm wondering, where did you always grow up around those things? Because some people come to it kind of, later. They don't grow up in a wilderness or a quiet place or a remote place. And I know you live in the middle of nowhere at the moment, but where did your interest in the land and landscape and zoology and all of these things come from?
Well, it did start on a housing estate, on a council estate in inner city Derry, which sounds crazy, but I think is a fitting image. Like, we're not separate from the natural world, we're part of it. And I think children know that a bit better than adults do in their core. Some adults know it really well, but children do have it. So I remember being really young and literally just watching spiders. We had a coal bunker in the backyard when I grew up, and it's like watching the way that they wove their webs. And I do remember there being a lot of insects, a lot of kind of ladies really fascinated me, and I think it was kind of a creepy crawling. A lot of frogs came. There's a stream that went along the bottom of the housing estate, the first one I grew up in, and I remember a lot of frogs. And I don't know if this is a common thing, but they would always come quite a distance when they were dying. A lot more, because childhood is a lot of frogs in our back garden, just in this council estate. And there was in the next housing estate that we moved to on the other side of the River Foyne, it was really close to Donegal, so we had lots of kind of hooper swans flying above us. And so I think that the natural world has always been something that has I don't want to say it's delivered solace, because I don't think I don't see the relationship as being one way. I see it as I've kind of just been aware of my place in this big world that isn't just a human world. So I think it started very early, probably 3 or 4, and I've always loved it. Yeah.
There is a sense in this book as well, because that you deal with a lot of big subjects and often quite fraught and sad subjects. But nature is a thread throughout the book that provides a sense of solace and a sense of comfort. And it seems that it's sort of delivered you from darkness at various points in your life. Has that been the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always very wary of kind of saying that nature cured or healed me, because I don't believe that fully. I believe it was part of a story that had a lot of layers. So as well as spending time in the natural world when I've been very down and when things have been very dark, I've also gone to therapy, and I don't have any sort of sense of shame there that I needed both of those things. Lots of people choose other routes with healing, but for me, being outdoors, being surrounded by something much bigger than me, but also something that I know I'm part of, has always kind of grounded me, kind of dragged me back. And we're really lucky, I think, where we live. Like, Ireland is so wild. I think people are realising that a lot more this year as well, which is really quite inspiring as well. Yeah.
For sure. It's one of the things that was really striking, and again, when you write the kind of work that we write and lots of other people write, is that you have to go where the rawness is. You have to go sometimes where the difficult subjects are, because I think the reader will know when you haven't, if you've shied away from it, and you don't in this book. And you talk about loneliness, and not just your own experience, but cultural loneliness, religious loneliness, geographic loneliness. How difficult was that to write, and to not prevent yourself from like censoring yourself or holding back? So how did you approach the more difficult elements of the book?
So I would say in that respect that the most important part of me being able to do that was definitely my editor, who knew when I was shying away from things and would just call it. Very much, I would say that that's something that I can't take full responsibility for, because I did hold so much back in all the early drafts. My editor kind of just told me to my face that your reader is saying that you're holding back here and you're not entering into a true enough relationship with her. And I think that touched me enough to realise that this isn't just this is a story of lots of people who've been through trauma, lots of people who have found a way through, people who are maybe still trying to find a way through, people who still feel very lonely. And so actually to hold anything back didn't feel kind. It didn't feel truthful or fair. So I think I've always tried to keep that at the back of my head, that this needs to be a very true telling of a life, which is hard, as you know. But I think ultimately it allows other people as well to come into their story. I mean, I know, like reading yourself, reading Emily Pine, sort of Sarah Baum, Darren Anderson, reading anyone who has given so much through their words, through their truths, it does mean that, say, I felt I could do it. And then hopefully that just keeps going, doesn't it? And I think we sort of almost we owe it to each other, as writers and as readers. Yeah.
Absolutely. I found that readers respond to the darkest, the saddest, the difficult stuff, the stuff that I tried to get around not doing. Did you find that, because you write very eloquently about your experience with giving up alcohol and with alcoholism, and again, it's not everybody wants to put things like that into their work, but I think you did it really well. Were you nervous about that, or did you have any moments where you think, I don't want to put that in?
I'm still nervous about that. I still, it's, I mean, it's still kind of a very delicate dance between just wanting to hide away, and which I very often do, and then wanting to actually be brave enough. Brave is the wrong word. I think brave is not the right word, but to be honest enough to kind of address it. The alcoholism and sort of my kind of journey with depression, and trying to balance light and dark in my life. It is something that I did struggle with writing, and I think even more so as the book comes out, I probably will struggle with along the way. But ultimately, I know that it's an important thing for me to do. Which sounds a bit selfish, but I think that there is a certain element of when you write something, you have to get some kind of a sense of you've given your everything to it.
Yeah.
And then you can stand over it, and you can say, well, I did that, and it might be, harrowing. But yeah, ultimately I'm glad that I did it. I think it's shaped my relationship with me in that respect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people may identify with it, and ultimately may help and reach out to a reader down the road that you don't know yet. It also reminded me a lot of you mentioned Amy Liptrot earlier, but Amy Liptrot's wonderful book, The Outrun, which kind of fuses her experience of giving up drinking and also finding herself and immersing herself in nature. I think of you, the two books is very kindred. It's also, when I think of other writers, I know that in that essay Mudlarking, you mentioned Heaney. I think it's the if self is a location, so is love, bearings taken, markings, cardinal points, which is the poem The Aerodrome. And you mentioned the curate Troy in this book as well. And I'm wondering, it's very hard to write in the shadow of Heaney if you're a writer from the north as well. But are there writers that are touchstones for you? Because I think a lot of us find our way has been lit by other people and how they've turned up on the page.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely adore Heaney. And I think that it is very difficult. I feel for poets, but at the same time, I also feel like there's an entirely, there's a brand new set of people that are coming out of the north that are just as good. That, there is no kind of, there's no void. I remember reading somewhere, there's this void created, when a great poet dies or a great writer dies, they always say there's a void. And there, great writers come out all the time. They still are, and the north is just, it's incredible what's coming out of the north right now. People that I'm really influenced by gosh, where do you start? I mean, obviously, Amy Liptrot has been really important. Lots of other memoirists, Darren Anderson, yourself, obviously, during the grief, Sarah Baum. But I'm also really drawn to poets. I love Alice Oswald. I think we all do. And then there's, I'm discovering a lot more sort of female writers that I just wouldn't have really known about until I started reading other Irish female writers that are contemporary. So I think it was yourself that introduced me properly to Maeve Brennan, for example, and I hadn't really experienced her before. So I think there's sort of a constant, as writers, we're constantly finding what works for us. So at the moment I'm reading a lot of Japanese literature. I'm really drawn to the simplicity, because mine can be very kind of flowery and it can kind of run off the page a bit. So I think we're always looking for kind of what works for us and what doesn't, so that we can place ourselves somewhere. But yeah, I'm just inspired by other writers, kind of constantly, which is, it's beautiful. Reading is what makes writing make sense in a way.
Yeah. Which it kind of brings me to my final question. It sort of dovetails nicely with it before I ask you to leave us with something reading. I think a lot of people found a lot of solace in reading in the last year, and COVID this past year has been, we're 10 months into it now, has been very, very difficult. So what has given you solace and hope? Because there is an awful lot of hope in this book. I found parts of it quite uplifting. What's given you hope in the last year?
In the last year, what has given me hope? Do you know what? It's really interesting, because I found that this year I've been more hopeful than I have in really dark and really scary. I don't know if that's because we're all kind of just trying to make lines and in their voices and in their words, but I think the things that have been giving me hope have been things that are really simple, so really simple joys. So I got a dog just before lockdown. She's a rescue dog and she's just incredible. And it's a love that I hadn't really ever experienced before. I just love her so much, and she just loves me so much. And I just, walking with her through the fields, same field every single day, slightly different route, but, watching the world kind of unfold every single day in and around the same time. It doesn't sound like it's a hope, that it can bring hope, but it really has. Sort of been writing to friends a lot. I don't have any internet signal really at all, and phone calls are difficult. So I've been to and froing with a lot of really strong female friends, and sort of reading other people's words has brought me a lot of hope. Just the world around us and the goodness that's in people. I mean, people are so good. People are just so, no matter what they've been through, people are just so giving. And I think that has come out a lot more this year.
For sure.
Which is, I feel really grateful that we've had this really difficult, we will continue to have a really difficult period, but that so many people have just continued to be there for each other. And that's pretty cool.
Agreed. Well said. I would love to hear, as I'm sure anybody watching this would love to hear you reading a section from the book, which we'll close with. So I just wondered, would you set up the reading and tell us which part of the book you're going to read from and read away?
Yeah, absolutely. So because we're just a few days away from St. Bridget's Day, and also because of the fact that the book kind of talks a lot about women and about how important they are to me and to my story, because of the things that have happened in the last few weeks in Ireland. I wanted to read from a section about Bridget. It's also about women being there for women and what we go through. So it's a bit of a tribute to all the women and children of Ireland. Okay. When winter lays its head down, memories dance like moths, the delicate ghosts of who we once were. There is a moment, a turning point in our Celtic year, when the Cailleach, the goddess of winter, gives up her crown to let the goddess of spring take her place. In the Celtic calendar, St. Bridget's Day falls midway between the winter solstice and the vernal equinox, and is celebrated on the 1st of February. It is a moment in the circle of our year when we can see the light reflecting and refracting, when we breathe out the hardship of the winter to learn that we have been strengthened, we have grown. Bridget was known for her kindness and compassion, a flame of inspiration in an ancient world of suffering. Born on the threshold of a door at the breaking of dawn, Bridget is a figure of liminality, the human equivalent of a thin place in many ways. She saw the darkness of the old ways and shone a light on them, showing strength, resilience, and that unnameable thing that flows through the blood of a woman. What is that thing that delivers strength in times of need, that lifts us up when we have been knocked, beaten, and kicked down? That thing that means we still rise, we still rise, we still and we always rise. We are women. Borderlines and the crossing over them are a central theme surrounding the woman that was known as St. Bride. For most of my life, I have viewed myself as being on the outside, sometimes through choice, sometimes, though, kept away by external forces from spaces and places without my desire or permission. Often this was due to where I came from, because of the fact of being born in the very particular part of the map that I was. Bridges, boundaries, barriers. The lexicon of St. Bride flowed through my veins like a blood-red cliche. We are women. Sometimes, though, the only person, the only thing keeping us on the outside, making us feel like there is no way back into the harbour, is our own self. And sometimes the moment comes where that falls away and we learn new words. A different path shows itself after the fog lifts. Sometimes we even start to see a way through, a way to slip through the borderline, the one we built with our hands alone. We are women.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kerri. And Kerri's book, Thin Places, has just been published by Canongate, so do make sure you pick it up or buy it for somebody else. And so thank you to the Irish Literary Society for helping to organise this event, and thank you, Kerri.
Thank you, Sinead.